بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Faith Over Despair. Today we reflect on a very simple yet powerful dua from the Quran. A dua for times of fear in our lives, for times when we face hard dangers and risks to us, when we feel so surrounded and frightened by them. This is a dua that is given to us in Surah Al Imran, verses 173, 174. Let's listen to the words of Allah Azza wa Jal as He presents this beautiful gift. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل فانقلبوا بنعمة من الله وفضل لم يمسسهم سوء واتبعوا رضوان الله والله ذو فضل عظيم. Those to whom others said a great army is gathering against you, so fear them. But it only increased them in faith. And they said, Allah is sufficient for us, and He is the best custodian. And they returned with grace and bounty from Allah. No harm has ever touched them. And they followed the good pleasure of Allah, and Allah is the Lord of all bounties. Indeed, beautiful verses from Allah Azza wa Jalla in which He refers to this very simple dua, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. We grew up saying this dua over and over, yet we rarely reflect or understand the power of this dua and when we need it in our lives and the promise of Allah that awaits us when we say this dua. These are verses that are referring to a time in the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, according to the reports, right after the Battle of Uhud. And we know that in the Battle of Uhud, many of the believers lost their lives, and even Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam tragically suffered severe injuries, and the believers were really heavily wounded. And after the retreat of the Meccans decided that they want to go back and finish off the Medinans, finish off the believers in Mecca once and for all, a decisive victory. They wanted to achieve a decisive victory, and why not? Why not? Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the believers also rallied around him, and they were not afraid at all to go out and fight again. And they indeed went out, and they were willing to go to battle again. But on the way, they heard from others. And how often does that happen in our lives when others come to us to deliver, frightening news, spread rumors, make suggestions. These are like waswasas, whispers of the shaitan, but also whispers of human being. And we're always hearing things of this nature from others around us in our lives. News that frighten us, news that promise that doom and gloom is waiting for you. And indeed, what the believers heard from these hypocrites and others that they met on the way was, listen, the Meccans have gathered a great army against you. They're going to come back and finish all of you. You have no chance whatsoever to withstand the force that is coming your way. Now think about it. How would you react when others are telling you there is a great enemy waiting for you? You're going to be surrounded from all directions. It's only a matter of time. They're coming to you right now. Oftentimes when we are bombarded by terrifying news and we let that seep into our minds, think of the consequences. How often do we feel paralyzed? How often do we feel that we are not capable of doing anything? We find our hearts pulsating more. We find our souls sweating. Interestingly enough, physically speaking, what happens in the brain is that when we become afraid, what's called a fight or flight response gets triggered in our brain, and the lower part, the base of the brain, it's called the amygdala, which processes the emotions of fear, takes over. And when it takes over, the prefrontal cortex, which does the thinking for our brains, gets suspended. It's no longer in control. The amygdala is in control. An interesting response that Allah wired in all of us to know how to run away from a lion when we're threatened by a lion. It's for physical danger. But imagine if we constantly react that way to any piece of news that comes and promises you doom and gloom. We're going to be constantly being, be hijacked by this amygdala, and our brains cannot function. So we become depleted, we become weaker, we become demoralized, and indeed, The believers, after they heard this news of this incoming doom, they could have easily reacted with that fear. They could have easily been paralyzed. And what would have happened is that they would have failed for sure. They could not even they wouldn't have been able to get up and sustain themselves in that journey. But instead, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us that they did something entirely different. Instead of listening to this waswasa, to these whispers, to this news, instead of reacting with fear and acting on that fear, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us that that news that they heard only fortified them in faith. It increased them in faith. They responded with their hearts. Instead of listening to the voices that terrified them, they chose to listen to the voice of Allah Azza wa Jal. They realized instantly that they are not alone, that Allah is with them. And they made a statement. Allah records it in the Quran. The statement is, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. That means, Hasbuna means sufficient for me. Allah is sufficient for us. Allah suffices us our needs in this moment, in this difficult moment when we're facing this danger that threatens our life. Wa ni'mal wakil. Ni'mal wakil, how excellent of a custodian he is. How excellent of a trustee he is. How excellent of a one that we can place our trust entirely on. It's a beautiful statement. Within that statement, we hear these believers affirming something beautiful, a testimony indeed in their hearts. In that moment of danger, they realized they couldn't depend on themselves. They realized that they have the creator of the heavens and the earth with them. Why have they chosen to take Allah as their custodian? And why should all of us react in the same way when we're bombarded by bad news, by difficult news, by overwhelmingly frightening news? Allah Azza wa Jal actually asks us that question. He says in the Quran, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِكَافٍ عَبْدَهُ? Am I not enough for you? Isn't Allah sufficient for His servant? Beautiful rhetorical question from Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah is asking you and me, who do you turn to? Who can really suffice you? Who is enough for you? Human beings? Yourself? Your job? Your wealth? Armies? Countries? Who? Who can you really turn to right now that can lift you up, that can heal you, that can fulfill you? Who is it that gave rise to you? Who is it that feeds you? Allah is asking these questions, and the answer should really be simple. We know the answer. But is it real in our hearts? Allah is asking again, am I not sufficient for you? Allah asks in the Quran, فَمَا ظَنُّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. He knows our hearts better than we know our own hearts. He says, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What is your opinion of Allah, the Lord and the Master of the worlds? He's reminding us, do you have a good opinion of me? Asking a very powerful question, or are you doubting me? When does that show up? That shows up when we're in difficult situations. When we find ourselves afraid, terrified, shivering, right? When we are really dwelling on the opinions of others that seek to dispirit us, demoralize us, then we're not listening to the voice of Allah. And perhaps in that moment, we're weak. We're not thinking of Allah well. Allah is asking us to think well of Him, and He's actually asking us, think well of me. When He asks us, am I not sufficient for you? He's asking us the question, who is it that splits the seed and the grain in the soil that allows it to become a tree? Who is it that brings down the rain? He's asking you and me, who initiated the heavens and the earth? In whose hand is the ownership of the dominion? In whose hand is all power, the infinite power? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no strength, there is no mind, there is no one that is capable of doing anything but Allah. He is the first and He is the last. His message is, lean on me, I'll suffice you. You cannot even lean on yourself. Think of our current situation. Where do we turn with this devastating pandemic that is surrounding us from all directions? We're locked up in our own homes. We're afraid of going out, right? We don't even know who to turn to. We're afraid for ourselves, our children. It is in these moments that Allah is asking us, place your trust in me. And Allah loves those who place their trust in Him, believing and trusting that Allah controls and sustains every creature, including that virus. Including that virus. The next part of the dua is Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Ni'mal wakil. These believers in Medina, they said, Ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for us. He's enough for us. He's enough for us. He fills us. And He is an excellent trustee, excellent custodian. We really trust in Him because He's very capable, infinitely capable. This is a name of Allah. Wakil is one of the names of Allah, the trustee. As if Allah's message is, place your trust in me. It's actually a request. When Allah gives us one of His names, that name is designed to fulfill your needs and my needs. It is meant for us. Allah Azza wa Jal wants us to go to Him and place our trust on Him. He wants us to entrust our affairs to Him, and He loves it when the servant has nowhere to turn but to Allah Azza wa Jal, and when that servant is realizing that in his or her heart. It's a grand moment for Allah Azza wa Jal, and He comes back racing. Now Allah Azza wa Jal tells us in this surah what happens next when the believers chose to place their trust in Allah in that moment of fear. فَانْقَلَبُوا بِنِعْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَفَضْلٍ. They return back with grace and bounty. Here's what Allah did. The all-powerful placed fear in the hearts of Quraysh. And that army that was promising to come back and finish off the believers with a decisive victory was terrified. How were they terrified? Nobody was there to confront them. They were by themselves. Yet Allah, the controller of hearts, placed fear in their hearts. And they decided not to even dare take a step towards Medina. The believers didn't have to do anything. It was the work of Allah. So Allah says they were completely protected from any harm and any evil, because Allah Azza wa Jal controls the heavens and the earth. So He shielded them completely, and that was the promise of Allah Azza wa Jal, protection, because the believers placed their trust in Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, it is reported in Al-Bukhari that Ibn Abbas said that this statement, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, is the same statement that Ibrahim alayhi salam said when he was thrown into the fire. So we're learning now that all prophets of Allah have said this statement because they faced incredible dangers and odds in their lives. So when they threw him into the fire, as we know from the story, what did he say in that moment? Imagine that fear, imagine that overwhelming, experience of being so surrounded and having no way out, having absolutely no means available to him in that moment. We know that Allah turned that fire into something cool for him. But when did it happen? When he was thrown into that fire, Ibrahim alayhi salam said, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for us, and He is an excellent trustee. When he did, Allah turned the fire into something cool, and he was saved completely. Ibn Abbas said it's the same statement that Musa alayhi salam said when his people said we're surrounded by Fir'aun and his army. They had the sea in front of them and the army of Fir'aun behind them. They were completely surrounded. They had no way out. A moment of tremendous fear. Everybody wanted to terrify Musa, and he had a choice. But instead of reacting to that fear and acting on it and listening to that voice, he chose to listen to the voice of Allah and said also Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, and we know the consequence. Allah opened the sea for him, and he was saved, and his people were saved. And Ibn Abbas said it's the same statement that Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the believers reacted with when others came and said to them, a great army has gathered against you, and they responded with Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, as we heard last time in the last episode, also refers to this dua, and he said, I also find wonder how anyone experiencing fear would miss out on saying Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil, because Allah said right after that dua, فَانْقَلَبُوا بِنِعْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَفَضْلٍ, that everyone who says this dua, he says, I heard the voice of Allah, I heard the words of Allah in the Quran promising that whoever says this, Allah Azza wa Jal will deliver them, will grant them grace and bounty right afterward, it is recorded in the Quran. So how can anyone experience fear and miss out on that? What a beautiful promise from Allah Azza wa Jal. How do we say this? And when do we say it? We say it in our times right now. Here we are in a very difficult situation in our lives, surrounded, afraid, uncertain, faced by an imminent danger that threatens our own well-being, the well-being of our families and our children. And Allah is inviting us to think and reflect on this beautiful dua and to say Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel, but to say it with fervor, say it with devotion, say it with absolute faith and trust in Allah Azza wa Jal, imagining ourselves like those believers after the battle of Uhud, so wounded, so afraid, and yet choosing to look at Allah Azza wa Jal and say Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. Allah is enough for us. Allah is sufficient for us. He's the best custodian. Imagine Allah hearing your voice when you say this right now. You and your family, you and your children, rest assured if you say this, Allah wants to open doors of relief for you. Allah will comfort you. Allah will lift you. Allah will calm you down. May Allah surround us with His mercy. May Allah make us among those who turn to Him with trust. May Allah always be sufficient for all of us. May Allah suffice all of our needs and alleviate our pain and suffering. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.